Well, hi there, and welcome back to Her Shrink Ray Eye. I'm Joan, and today I want to talk about something that's so common in open-style figure and scale modeling competitions that we hardly notice it. Those familiar skill levels like basic, standard, and masters. We check the box, we move along. But I think it's worth pausing to think about what these levels may imply at more than just the surface level. I think it's more complex and maybe a more limiting aspect of competition than it first appears. Levels can also say something about how we see each other and ourselves as artists. Do we even see ourselves as artists? Skill levels like standard and masters may feel comforting because they create the illusion of clear measurement, something external, something safe. But artistry isn't safe. It's uncertain, it's messy, and it rarely follows a straight line. This discussion is for anyone who's ever been told where they belong at a miniature show competition and found that to be a little off-putting. Or maybe the idea of skill levels just conflicts with your view of creativity and artistic and technical growth. Let's start with something foundational: how miniature and scale modeling competitions are judged. If you've never entered a show or never been to a show before, or haven't even thought much about the structure, there are two main types of judging systems out there: the 1-2-3 system and the open system. The 1-2-3 system is the simplest. In each category, judges award a first, second, and third place. That's it. Whether there are 10 entries or 100, only 3 will be recognized. The rest receive nothing. To allow for more awards, organizers sometimes split categories into smaller, more specific ones. But the structure still revolves around ranking, and it's a contest with winners and everyone else. The open system works a little differently. There's still a competitive spirit, but it's less about comparing artists against each other and more about evaluating each piece on its own merits. At least that's what we tell ourselves it is. There are many variations of the open system. But the basic premise is that instead of just one winner, multiple entries can earn awards, certificates of merit, bronze, silver, or gold medals, based on how well they meet the standards of the hobby or the standards of the show you're attending. There's no fixed number of awards. If 20 entries in a category are gold worthy, 20 golds are given. If none meets the standard, no golds are handed out. It's about recognizing the overall quality of the entries, not picking the top 3. Let's talk about where skill-based levels fit into open-style competitions. There's a lot of variation in how shows handle this, but the basic structure usually involves 2 to 4 skill levels. The most consistent is juniors, typically reserved for younger participants, often under the age of 16. It gives kids and teens a place to participate without being directly compared to adults. Although I've seen cases where junior work is moved into one of the adult tiers because it's just that good. Basic, or beginner as it's sometimes called, is for modelers who are new to the hobby or have never entered a show before. These folks may still be finding their way and aren't sure where their work fits in yet. It's often more about encouragement and feedback at this level. The middle tier, usually called standard, intermediate, or something similar, is meant for hobbyists who have a solid grasp of the fundamentals and are producing consistent work. They may not yet have the refinement or maturity associated with the master's level artists, but they're well on their way. Sometimes it just depends a little on the context of the show. For example, at the World Model Expo in Versailles, there was some top-level work in standard. Work that you would see at most other shows that could easily be put in the advanced category or the master's category. It just kind of varies from show to show. At the top is masters or advanced, meant to recognize those who have developed a high level of technical and artistic skill and may have accumulated awards at major shows. They've been around for a long time and are recognized at a high level. Of course, definitions of master can vary from show to show, place to place. And so does the comfort level of artists who find themselves placed there. I should mention that at both the MMSI in Chicago and MFCA in Philadelphia, two shows that I've attended often and exhibited at, I've noticed that intermediate levels have pretty much disappeared over the years. Instead, almost all the work shows up in the advanced level. I know that at the MMSI show in particular, the standard level, as it is sometimes referred to, was a failed experiment because so few people even wanted to enter that level. Both shows, though, still maintain a junior level. In my mind, something to consider is that skill-based levels, despite their best intentions, are deeply subjective. Some shows require artists to move up a level after a certain number of wins, while others allow self-selection. In practice, it's difficult to be consistent with how people move between these tiers, and the criteria can feel just as arbitrary as any other part of judging. Different judges, different years, different outcomes. And for all the structure they offer, these levels don't always reduce subjectivity. In some cases, they add another layer to it. Interestingly, most 1, 2, 3 systems, which are more common at plastic model shows like IPMS, don't use skill-based tiers at all. They simply judge all entries within a category against each other, awarding first, second, and third place. No levels, no tiers, just a straightforward ranking. That contrast makes the presence of skill levels in open system shows even more worth examining, I think. What purpose are they really serving? And are they helping artists grow or just sorting them into neat little boxes? Let me give you an example of how things can be done a little differently without the skill level sorting. I've had the chance to attend a show for the past 2 years that's doing something quite revolutionary, and it's happening right here in Salt Lake City. And unlike most shows, they've done away with categories, tiers, and skill levels entirely. No divisions, no basic, no masters, no genre boxes. Instead, each modeler, each artist gets a personal display space, a small gallery of their own, where everything they've brought is shown together. And when it comes time to judge, the evaluators don't dissect or compare entries across artificial lines. They simply look for the piece most likely to earn that modeler the highest award, regardless of whether it's a sci-fi figure, a tank, or a scratch-built diorama. It's simple, but it's also unique. I haven't been to another open show that approaches the competition in this way. What makes this format so remarkable is that it quietly embodies the core philosophy of the open system. Maybe even more so than most open shows do. It celebrates the whole artist. It invites risk-taking. It removes the pressure to perform in one narrow category. And the response? Overwhelmingly positive. Not just from newcomers, but from seasoned modelers as well. The best part of this approach, it invites connection, curiosity, and conversation between exhibitors, which I think is the most important aspect of any miniature show. In a hobby that can sometimes get bogged down in tradition, this approach feels like a breath of fresh air. It reminds us that creative growth doesn't always follow a hierarchy, and that the most meaningful recognition might come not from being sorted into levels and categories, but from being seen as a whole, like your own little island of creativity. I have to say right up front, I am not a fan of most skill-based levels, except when it comes to juniors and maybe basic for complete beginners. Juniors makes more sense to me in that it's a more objective level since it's based on an actual age range. Basic may have its place, but I think there may be better ways to help people improve their modeling if that's what they want to do. Sometimes we get stuck on the competitive aspect of the hobby as the only way to improve, and I don't think that is the only way to improve. To me, it's a lot more helpful to have a discussion with someone about whatever I'm exhibiting. I recently had this experience when I was showing someone my box diorama at a show. I took off the front of the box for them to look inside, and they were like, "Wow, I didn't realize that was a real shadow. I thought it was painted on." That was such a cool moment. Also, having someone say, "Why did you make those color choices? And did you think about doing this or that?" Whatever it might be, is far more helpful and encouraging than winning a medal, at least for me. That's why I think it's worth taking a closer look at these skill levels. Maybe even from a different angle than we're used to. It feels like there's more going on here than just a simple way to group people for a competition. And maybe, just maybe, looking at it differently could shift how we think about creativity, growth, and where we all fit in. At first, I was simply excited to attend shows and didn't really think about the mechanics of the show. There was a shared excitement about technique and dedication to the craft. But as I got more familiar with how things were structured, I began noticing the use of tiered skill levels like basic, standard, and masters. They seemed logical at first, a way to group modelers by experience, but over time I realized they carried unintended weight. They seemed to shape how we perceive others' work and our own. Here's the thing. Those labels aren't just skill levels. They carry weight. They imply status. If you're in masters, there's pressure to be perfect. If you're in basic or standard, people might glance at your work and move on. No matter how brilliant or personal your piece is, it's judged through the lens of your level. I've watched people do this at shows. Someone even said to me once, years ago, "Don't waste your time looking at basic." My reply was, I am not wasting my time. I want to see what people starting out are interested in, how they approach the hobby without all that baggage of years of competition and building and painting just for shows. I think some creativity is lost when you just paint for medals. That's why looking at those basic levels at a show, there is often so much creativity and courage in those levels that you would never see in any other place in the show. And for me, it's not a stretch to imagine that two entries of the same quality might be awarded differently based on the level they were entered in. When you think about it, what really is the difference between a gold in standard and a silver in masters? Maybe it's just perception. But I think that subtle shift in perception has more influence than we often realize. That got me thinking, maybe we need to step back and look at these levels from a wider angle. Let's zoom out beyond the hobby itself to other fields, other cultures, and even history to see how this kind of sorting shows up in other places and how it's not always in ways that help us grow. So what are skill-based levels actually meant to do? Proponents argue that tiers like standard and masters allow for fairer judging. A beginner isn't being compared directly to a world-class painter, so the playing field feels level. In theory, this encourages people to enter shows because they'll be evaluated alongside others with similar experience or skill. Levels also give structure. If you win a gold in standard, you might be promoted to masters or advanced. This creates a sense of progression, like leveling up in a game or sport. Some argue it keeps the competitive element motivating and clear. But here's what I see as a problem with skill-based levels, and I want to ask why. Why do we need these levels in an open system that's supposed to reward effort, craftsmanship, and growth on their own merits? Isn't the point of open judging that multiple works can earn medals without forcing comparison between artists? In theory, that's what the open system is, but in practice, comparisons are made just the same. The standard in the hobby needs to be based on something. In general, the standard seems to be derived from top-level artists and painters from the various categories like historical, fantasy, and ordnance. I like to remember that the standard of the hobby is based on a subjective perception. There is no magic objective rubric that can define the standard of the hobby, award medals, or put people in skill-based classes. When we divide by skill, we're not just organizing entries. We're creating a hierarchy. And hierarchies do what they've always done. They divide. Think about the caste system in India or the rigid tiers in youth sports that push kids to burn out or quit. When you're told you're standard, how does that make you feel? And if you're told you're a master, do you still feel safe to experiment, or are you trapped in perfectionism? Let's step outside the hobby for a minute and see skill-based levels and the hierarchies they create and why this may not be the answer to making competition fairer or the playing field more even. While not a one-to-one correlation, the parallels do allow us to consider some aspects of skill-based levels that you may not have considered before. The fine art world has been struggling with similar issues for a long time. They have often been criticized for exclusivity and elitism. Prestigious galleries, museum shows, and invitation-only events can have the effect of alienating newcomers and non-professional artists. It creates that sense of insiders and outsiders, much like standard and masters, which can create an environment where less experienced or outside artists feel unwelcome and marginalized, regardless of their creativity or potential. Outsider art is a great example of this from the art world. The term was coined around 1945 by the French artist Jean Dubuffet and refers to artists who work outside of the established cultural mainstream. Often they're self-taught, unfiltered, spontaneous, and they often use unconventional materials in their work. Historically, this type of art has been labeled as separate or lesser than traditional art, and often dismissed no matter how profound their work. Why? Because the art world loves its own form of masters. It rewards polish and presentation over raw voice or vision. Fortunately, today, this is changing with some outsider art making it into major museum collections. But even with this progress, their work is often categorized as not mainstream. The label outsider brings both visibility and limitations. It's not a stretch to say that labeling a model as standard does something similar. It can limit how seriously that work is taken, even if it's just as meaningful, imaginative, or technically impressive as something placed in a higher level like masters. Labels have the power to open doors or quietly close them, not based on the quality of your work, but the perceived skill level it's been placed in. Maybe a more direct parallel from the art world are the informal but widely recognized tiers that artists are often grouped into to describe where they are in their careers. These classifications are used for pricing artists' work in galleries. They can determine eligibility for grants and residencies, curating exhibitions, and how much and what type of media exposure they get. And they affect collector interest in their work. Publications like Art World Demystified and The Artist's Guide by Jackie Battenfield describe how these classifications work. There are three main classifications for artists for determining where they are on their journey. There is the emerging artist for early career artists still gaining traction, mid-career for artists that have some exhibition history and recognition, and finally established artists for those that have been around a long time, have a prestigious reputation around the art world, and their work is often in institutional collections. While these categories can be helpful for navigation, these skills can also have unintended side effects that mirror some of the issues that can happen with skill-based levels. Let's take a look at how these labels might compare to our hobby. Emerging artist could be equivalent to basic, and to some extent, those just starting out in standard or intermediate levels. The intent of this classification is to support new or lesser-known creators. The unintended effect can be that artists and modelers feel dismissed. One fine art critic noted, "Emerging often feels like a euphemism for not yet legitimate." We could equate this to a gold in standard, maybe seen as lesser than a silver in masters, even if the work is highly skilled and emotionally resonant. I think for some people that's just how it is, and that perception works in that way for both the exhibitor and the viewer of their work. Not always, but it can happen. I think that's why at shows that do allow people to choose their skill level, I've observed that most of the time people choose to put their work in the higher level rather than an intermediate level. I've been to shows where the lower levels have maybe 2 or 3 entries at most. I think maybe the scarcity of entries in these levels is partly why exhibitors choose the higher levels as well. They want to be part of the larger group. Mid-career artists could be equated to the standard skill level, with the intent to recognize growth and maturing style. The effect can be different in that it can imply a plateau. Mid-level artists often struggle to secure support as they're caught between promising newcomer and celebrated veteran. They are stuck proving themselves. Standard level modelers can feel invisible, too advanced for encouragement, not elite enough for acclaim. Finally, the established artist classification roughly parallels the master skill level. Established artists sometimes feel pigeonholed into marketable styles at the cost of experimentation and evolution. A slip at the top can be judged way more harshly than a beginner daring to attempt something new. Master-level modelers can feel pressure to produce only polished, competition, and collector-friendly work, much like their established artist counterparts in the art world. The fine art world's use of these labels may serve institutional needs, but they also risk flattening the complex nature of artistic development. Just like skill-based levels in modeling shows, they presume a linear career arc when growth is often cyclical or non-traditional. They risk trapping creators in roles that shape behavior more than skill. And they can undermine collaboration by reinforcing boundaries between artists at different points in their creative journey. Just remember, these kinds of labels, whether in the art world or on a show table, aren't as objective as they might seem. There's too much nuance in each person's path, too many variables for any system to ever be truly objective. Labels can shape perception, they can confine, they can divide, they can signal inclusion or exclusion. But for the most part, I think they risk overshadowing the messy, evolving journey that is creativity. Even if we turn to an AI to sort us into skill levels or judge our work, the process wouldn't suddenly become objective. Algorithms are only as neutral as the data we feed them, and in the case of art, that data is built on human opinions, preferences, and biases. So even the machine ends up reflecting our subjectivity back at us. It may feel like it's precise, but it's still guessing in the dark when it comes to something as personal as creativity. And here's another example that really brings into focus how much labels can stick with you. Think about the world of theater. Once an actor becomes known as the comic relief or the dependable sidekick, it can be incredibly hard for them to be seen as a lead or to be put into a serious role, no matter how much talent they have. That's the trap of typecasting. The role defines the actor, not the other way around. The same thing can happen in our world. Winning in the standard tier doesn't suddenly recast someone in the eyes of the community. They might be seen quietly, persistently as a mid-level painter. Tiered systems, even unintentionally, can typecast us. And when that happens, artistic freedom starts to shrink. Not always, but often enough that it's worth questioning and thinking about. Let's switch gears and look at some societal class parallels. I know this may seem off topic, but I think sometimes it's important to think outside the box and look at things from a different perspective. A miniature show is not society at large, but there are some parallels to the outside world. There are many examples of class-based systems throughout history. The Indian caste system comes to mind. While not directly comparable, systems like the Indian caste system show how social labels can shape access and opportunity, often long after their official use has faded. These types of systems can echo the idea of the haves and have-nots, symbolizing gradations of opportunity according to your level. When people are labeled as standard and master, they may feel boxed in, not by skill, but by expectations, and creativity can become constrained by the boundaries of a level or a label. Think about it. How many collectors seek out and buy works from the basic or standard levels? Do they go to those artists and tables first to see about collecting their work? Or do they go to the established masters and the masters' tables first? I'm sure it varies, but it's worth thinking about. I imagine there are more opportunities for those on the masters' tables. Along these lines, I ran across an interesting term that was coined by the sociologist M.N. Srinivas, and it's called Sanskritization. This is the idea that lower caste groups adopt upper caste customs and values to elevate their status. Similarly, standard and basic level modelers may imitate the styles common to the master's level artists and end up prioritizing polish and popular styles over personal voice to try and move up to a higher skill level. Their creative voice is flattened into conformity, mirroring how Sanskritization can cause cultural homogenization. All you need to do to see this in practice is to look at the show tables. There are styles that are repeated over and over and over again at all levels. So just to look a little deeper, let's take a look at an interesting educational theory that I ran across while I was doing the research for this episode. And I think it can give us a perspective about how we develop skill in any pursuit. It's called the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, and it offers some interesting insight into how humans learn. The model was developed by Hubert and Stuart Dreyfus in the 1980s at the University of California, Berkeley. It was built for things like pilot training, medical practice, and chess playing, but its insight into how mastery develops is relevant to art and many creative disciplines as well. The model relies on 5 stages to explain learning: novice, advanced beginner, competent, proficient, and expert. I think where this is interesting when you look at it in the context of learning a skill, like painting or learning how to use an airbrush. The Dreyfus model describes how people move from rule-bound beginners to intuitive experts, and how growth is deeply individual. It recognizes that people learn at different speeds, sometimes stumble, and sometimes they leap ahead unexpectedly. Unlike systems that rely on external judgments, like skill levels at open shows, the Dreyfus model values the inner experience of learning. That's why it resonates with me. It's about process, not placement. It celebrates exploration, not conformity. And it reminds me that artistic growth isn't always about what you win. It's about what you discover. Maybe it's time we looked at model shows the same way, not as ladders to climb, but as spaces to grow, to experiment, and to be seen wherever we are in our journey. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, Joan, let's go back to the beginning of the discussion, and you might be thinking, isn't it worse to have a beginner directly compared to someone who's been doing this for 40 years? And sure, that's a fair concern. But that's what the spirit of the open system is meant to address. It's designed to reward good work wherever it appears, not just at the top. The goal isn't to compare beginners and veterans. It's to acknowledge excellence no matter where it shows up. What's more, real learning comes from feedback, not placement. Systems that emphasize critique, mentorship, and growth over medals create healthier communities. You can still celebrate quality without stratifying people and boxing them in. What can we do instead? Tiers like standard and masters imply a linear hierarchical path that falsely assumes mastery in the hobby is measurable, static, or uniform. It adds another subjective tier to the awards themselves. They can trap people in their lane, and worse, they can function as some type of identity marker that subtly reinforces feelings of inferiority or superiority. I have no illusions that this would not be an uphill battle, and it's not likely to ever really be addressed widely at shows, but it's still worth considering what it would be like to do something different. Maybe we could move away from skill-based tiers and look at something more fluid and feedback-oriented. Maybe there could be a portfolio-based submission option where modelers can choose a group of works to be judged collectively to demonstrate range or storytelling. This could emphasize personal voice over single-entry perfection. It may even give a voice to unconventional or outsider artists and reward narrative and body of work, not polish and style alone. That way, everybody gets what they need without being sorted into categories or levels. Instead of assigning a modeler a level that implies a rank or social class, we evaluate and recognize their growth, their intent, and their creative journey based on what their work shows, and supplement that with commentary or feedback from judges or peers. Think of it like learning milestones in education or studio critiques in art school, where you aren't ranked, but you're helped along your path. It could also be possible to replace levels with observational frames or creative development themes. Maybe exploratory for artists that are experimenting with ideas or styles. Expressive for work that conveys clear storytelling or mood. Technical excellence for pieces showing advanced control of finish, color, form, and construction. Maybe you could have something like signature style emergence for work that shows a distinctive voice, a distinctive style, or recurring themes across multiple entries. Each of these can exist in one model, and that's the point. It may be possible to lessen the idea of ladder climbing and encourage entrants to see themselves along multiple evolving paths. Maybe you try something that's based on feedback alone. Allow participants to enter optional feedback tracks like, I'm trying something new. Tell me how to improve my painting and finish. I want to learn about storytelling. I'd love to do something out of my comfort zone. Give me a challenge. This is more goal-based and personalized rather than tier-based. Art doesn't grow in straight lines. Growth doesn't follow a checklist. Sometimes a beginner paints something visionary. Sometimes a veteran takes a bold risk and stumbles. When we assign value based on level, we sometimes shut the door on those moments of surprise, those sparks of real creativity. Skill-based levels might seem helpful, but they can quietly build barriers. They tell us who belongs where, and they make some people feel like their work has less value just because of a label. So here's my take. Let's build shows where effort, curiosity, and heart matter more than rank. If we must have skill-based levels, let's make sure they're clearly explained. The artist has a choice. And most importantly, don't dismiss work because it's in something lower than masters or advanced. Let's make space for the weird, the wonderful, and the unexpected, no matter who made it or what level it's placed in. Art isn't about climbing a ladder. It's about making something that matters. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, follow, or just carve out a little time to listen. I'll be right here with my lamp on, brush in hand, story waiting. Until next time, keep your hands steady, see clearly, nod obediently, and keep your story your own. Thanks for listening.